The morning fog rolled across Sands Point on October 15, 1927, as demolition crews positioned their wrecking balls against the towering walls of Beacon Towers. For 25 years, this 140-room colossus had dominated Long Island's Gold Coast, its turrets and towers visible for miles across the Sound. Within hours, what had cost Alva Vanderbilt Belmont $3 million to build, roughly $50 million in today's currency, would be reduced to rubble, its stones sold for a mere $2,800. But the mansion's true story wouldn't die with its physical form. 5 years earlier, a young writer named F. Scott Fitzgerald had stood at its gates, transfixed by its impossible grandeur and the whispered scandals that swirled around its empty rooms. This was no ordinary demolition. This was the erasure of evidence, the burial of secrets that had inspired one of American literature's greatest novels. How did a palace built to last centuries survive barely a quarter of one? And why did its owner abandon it so completely that she never set foot inside for the last decade of its existence? Chapter 1. The Vanderbilt Gambit. Alva Vanderbilt stood at the edge of Sands Point in the spring of 1902, her divorce papers barely 6 months old, surveying the 644 acres that would become her Declaration of Independence. The March wind whipped across the Long Island Sound as she instructed her architect, Richard Howland Hunt, to design something that would make Newport's mansions look quaint. "I want them to see it from Connecticut," she reportedly told him, pointing across the water. "I want them to know a woman built it." The timing was no accident. Her sensational divorce from William Kissam Vanderbilt had awarded her $10 million outright, plus $100,000 annually for life, making her one of the wealthiest independent women in America. While her ex-husband consoled himself with yachts and younger women, Alva plotted architectural revenge. She had already forced her daughter Consuelo into marriage with the Duke of Marlborough, securing a title for the family. Now she would build a castle worthy of that connection. Hunt's design merged Scottish baronial severity with French chateau grandeur, creating a hybrid monster of stone and ambition. The main structure would stretch 268 feet across the bluff, with the central tower soaring 85 feet into the sky. The blueprints called for 140 rooms, including 30 bedrooms, 15 bathrooms, revolutionary for the era, and a dining hall that could seat 200. The kitchen complex alone would occupy 3,000 square feet, larger than most contemporary homes. But the mansion's most remarkable feature wasn't visible on any blueprint. Alva insisted on installing one of the first residential elevator systems on Long Island, not for convenience, but for theater. The elevator car was lined with Louis XV panels stolen from a demolished Parisian hotel, and its machinery required a dedicated engineer who lived on the grounds. The installation alone cost $45,000 more than most Americans would earn in several lifetimes. The foundation work began in May 1902, requiring 200 Italian laborers to blast through the coastal bedrock. These men, mostly recent immigrants from Sicily and Calabria, lived in temporary shanties on the property's edge, working 12-hour shifts for $1.50 per day. Their foreman, Giuseppe Moretti, had brought his entire extended family from Palermo to work the job. His grandson would later recall that the men called the growing structure Il Mostro, the monster, both for its size and for its appetite for human labor. By September, the limestone walls had begun to rise. Alva had insisted on Indiana limestone, the same material being used for the new Penn Station. Each block had to be shipped by rail to Long Island City, then barged across to Sands Point, then hauled by horse team up the bluff. The logistics alone employed another 100 men, creating a supply chain that stretched from the Midwest quarries to the Gold Coast shores. The society pages breathlessly covered every development. Town topics, the gossip sheet of the elite, ran weekly updates on the construction progress. "Mrs. Belmont's fortress grows daily more imposing," they wrote in December 1902, using her new married name after her swift remarriage to Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont. "One wonders if she builds to keep the world out or to keep her secrets in." That winter, as snow blanketed the construction site, tragedy struck. Two workers, Polish immigrants whose names the newspapers didn't bother to record, fell from scaffolding on the North Tower, plummeting 60 feet to their deaths. Alva's response was to increase the pace of construction, offering bonuses for sections completed ahead of schedule. The local coroner ruled the deaths accidental, though workers whispered about cut corners and impossible deadlines. The mansion's technological ambitions extended beyond elevators. Alva demanded full electrification at a time when most Gold Coast estates still relied primarily on gas. The power plant required to run Beacon Towers was built a quarter-mile from the main house, its coal-fired generators producing enough electricity to power a small town. The plant's chief engineer, brought from Edison's own staff, lived in a cottage nearby with his family, on call 24 hours a day, to ensure the lights never dimmed during Alva's legendary parties. As 1903 dawned and the walls reached their full height, the true scale of Alva's achievement, or folly, became clear. This wasn't just a home. It was an industrial operation masquerading as a residence, a machine for living that required constant feeding of coal, money, and human effort. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Ambition. Richard Howland Hunt inherited more than just his father's architectural practice when Richard Morris Hunt died in 1895. He inherited the responsibility of building for America's most demanding clients. His father had created the Breakers and Biltmore. Now, facing Alva Vanderbilt Belmont in his Madison Avenue office in January 1902, the younger Hunt understood he was being asked to surpass them all. The design challenge was unprecedented. Alva wanted a structure that combined the defensive strength of a Scottish castle with the social grandeur of Versailles, all while incorporating the latest American technology. Hunt's solution was radical. Instead of one massive building, he designed an interconnected complex of structures ascending the bluff in stages, each section serving a different purpose, while maintaining the illusion of a single, organic whole. The main entrance hall, positioned at the center of the complex, rose 3 stories through the building's heart. Its ceiling was a masterwork of plaster and gilt, incorporating 23-karat gold leaf applied by Venetian craftsmen brought specifically for the task. These artisans, led by master plasterer Antonio Benedetti, worked for 6 months on this single room, sleeping in the mansion's unfinished servants' quarters to save time. Benedetti's daily wage of $15 was 10 times what the laborers moving stones outside earned. The grand staircase, Hunt's centerpiece, defied structural logic. Carved from a single deposit of Carrara marble, each step weighed nearly a ton. Installing them required dismantling part of the exterior wall and using a specially constructed crane powered by a steam engine. The marble had been selected by Alva personally during a trip to Italy in 1901, where she'd spent 3 weeks at the quarries choosing specific veins and patterns. The cost of shipping alone exceeded $30,000. Hunt's plans called for 30 bedrooms, each with its own distinctive theme and decorative scheme. The Chinese room featured hand-painted silk wallpaper that took artists in Beijing 8 months to complete. The Napoleon suite included furniture allegedly used by the emperor himself, purchased from a desperate French aristocrat for $75,000. The English room contained oak paneling stripped from a Tudor manor house that was being demolished in Kent, each piece numbered, shipped, and reassembled like a massive puzzle. But it was the technological infrastructure that truly set Beacon Towers apart. Hunt designed a heating system that used 14 coal-fired boilers in the basement, connected to over 300 radiators throughout the building. The ductwork alone required 15 miles of iron piping, all of it hidden within the walls. The system consumed 50 tons of coal per week during winter months, requiring a dedicated rail spur to be built from the main Long Island Railroad line to the property. The kitchen complex represented another feat of engineering. Hunt positioned it in a separate wing, connected by both above-ground and underground passages, ensuring that no cooking odors would reach the main living spaces. The main kitchen featured 8 ranges, each capable of different temperatures, and one of the first electric refrigeration systems in a private home. The ice-making machine, imported from Germany, could produce 200 pounds of ice daily, though it required its own engineer to maintain. The mansion's 15 bathrooms pushed the boundaries of Edwardian plumbing. Each featured both hot and cold running water, a luxury that required a 50,000-gallon water tower hidden within one of the decorative turrets. The tower had to be filled daily by steam pumps drawing from 3 artesian wells drilled 200 feet into the bedrock. The master bathroom, Alva's private sanctuary, featured a tub carved from a single block of pink Tennessee marble, so heavy that the floor joists had to be reinforced with steel beams. Hunt's most innovative feature was also his most subtle, a comprehensive servant passage system that allowed staff to move throughout the mansion invisibly. These passages, barely 3 feet wide in places, ran parallel to every major room and corridor. Staff could service fireplaces, deliver meals, and remove waste without ever being seen by guests. The system included its own stairways, elevators, and even speaking tubes that allowed the head butler to communicate with staff anywhere in the building. The construction of these parallel worlds, one for display, one for labor, required extraordinary coordination. Hunt maintained an on-site office throughout construction, employing 6 draftsmen to constantly revise plans as new challenges arose. When they discovered the bedrock wasn't level, requiring some foundation walls to be 20 feet deeper than planned, Hunt redesigned the entire basement level to incorporate wine cellars and storage rooms that hadn't been in the original plans. As the mansion neared completion in late 1903, Hunt calculated that the project had consumed 14 million bricks, 7,000 tons of limestone, 500 tons of marble, and 200 tons of decorative bronze. But no calculation could capture the human cost. Beyond the 2 recorded deaths, hospital records from Glen Cove showed dozens of injuries among construction workers, from crushed fingers to broken backs, none of which made it into the society pages, celebrating Alva's architectural triumph. Chapter 3. The Army of Shadows. At 4:30 each morning, before the Gold Coast's millionaires had stirred in their silk-sheeted beds, Margaret O'Sullivan was already walking the 2 miles from Sands Point Village to Beacon Tower's service entrance. As head housekeeper, she commanded an indoor staff of 42 people, each with precisely defined roles in maintaining Alva Belmont's domestic empire. Her handwritten ledgers, discovered in the mansion's ruins and now preserved at the Sands Point Historical Society, provide an extraordinary window into the hidden machinery that powered Gilded Age grandeur. The staff hierarchy was as rigid as any military organization. Below Mrs. O'Sullivan stood the butler, James Worthington, an Englishman who had previously served at Chatsworth House. His annual salary of $1,800 made him the highest-paid servant, though this was still less than what Alva spent monthly on fresh flowers. Worthington oversaw 8 footmen, each required to be exactly 6 feet tall. Alva insisted on uniformity, and trained in the elaborate service rituals she had observed at European courts. The kitchen brigade operated under French chef Auguste Moreau, poached from Delmonico's for the extraordinary sum of $3,000 annually. Moreau commanded 4 sous chefs, 6 kitchen maids, and 2 specialized pastry chefs. The kitchen operated 18 hours a day, preparing not just for the family's meals, but for the separate dining requirements of the senior staff, junior staff, and stable workers, each group eating different food at different times in different rooms. Beyond the indoor staff lay another universe of workers. The grounds employed 25 gardeners year-round, supervised by head gardener Angus McPherson, a Scotsman who had redesigned the estate's 50 acres of formal gardens. McPherson's notebooks record his weekly orders: 1,000 roses, 500 orchids, and 2,000 seasonal flowers, all to maintain the mansion's 180 flower arrangements that were changed every 3 days, regardless of whether anyone was home to see them. The stable complex, a quarter-mile from the main house, employed another 15 men to care for 30 horses, and by 1910, 8 automobiles. The head groom, an Irishman named Patrick Kelly, lived above the stables with his wife and 6 children, all of whom worked on the estate by age 12. Kelly's son, interviewed in 1967, recalled that his family saw the inside of the main mansion only once, when they were allowed to walk through the empty ballroom on Christmas morning 1911. But it was the invisible workers who truly kept Beacon Towers functioning. The coal heavers, mostly recent Italian immigrants, fed the furnaces in 8-hour shifts around the clock from October through April. Working in temperatures that exceeded 100 degrees, they moved an average of 6 tons of coal per shift. Their leader, Salvatore Rossi, lost 3 fingers to the furnace doors, but continued working for 12 years, sending most of his $18 weekly wage back to his village in Sicily. The laundry complex employed 12 women, mostly Irish immigrants, who washed, dried, and pressed an average of 3,000 items weekly. The head laundress, Mary Flanagan, developed a system using color-coded tags to track each piece through the cleaning process. Her innovation was later adopted by commercial laundries across New York. Yet her name appears nowhere in the mansion's official records. She was simply listed as Laundress Number 1 in the wage books. The human cost of maintaining Alva's palace extended beyond physical labor. Staff were required to sign contracts forbidding marriage without permission, prohibited from leaving the grounds except on their half-day off per week, and subject to immediate dismissal for moral infractions that included being seen in public with someone of the opposite sex. When footman Thomas Brown was spotted walking with kitchen maid Ellen Murphy in the village, both were terminated without references, effectively ending their ability to find similar work. The servants' quarters, hidden behind a false wall on the mansion's north side, told their own story of inequality. While Alva's bedroom suite covered 1,200 square feet, the female servants slept 4 to a room in spaces of 100 square feet. These rooms, unheated except by small coal stoves they had to tend themselves, reached freezing temperatures in winter. Dr. William Garrett's medical records from 1908 show that respiratory infections among Beacon Towers staff were 3 times higher than the general population. Yet, for all their hardships, many workers developed complex relationships with their servitude. Mrs. O'Sullivan's diary reveals pride in her expertise and the smooth operation of the household. "Today managed Lady Astor's visit without a single error," she wrote in June 1909. 40 for dinner, French service, completed in 2 hours 15 minutes. Mrs. B said adequate. This single word of mild praise was the only acknowledgement O'Sullivan received in 7 years of service. The economic ecosystem created by Beacon Towers extended far beyond its walls. The mansion's weekly orders supported dozens of local businesses. The fishmonger who supplied 200 pounds of seafood weekly, the florist who grew orchids specifically for Alva's preferences, the wine merchant who maintained a dedicated warehouse for the estate's purchases. When Beacon Towers finally closed, the economic ripple effects devastated Sands Point Village with unemployment rising by 60% within 6 months. The preservation of these workers' stories required deliberate archaeology. Most left no written records, but their presence can be traced through wage books, hospital records, immigration documents, and the occasional photograph where they appear as blurred figures at the edges of society portraits. Their labor built and maintained an American Versailles, yet they remained as invisible as the service passages they traversed. Shadows in the golden light of the Gilded Age. Chapter 4. The Season of Spectacle. The summer of 1909 marked the apex of Beacon Tower's glory when Alva Belmont orchestrated a series of entertainments that would become legendary even among the Gold Coast's jaded elite. Her suffragette rally on July 17th assembled 3,000 people on the mansion's great lawn, while her Venetian Carnival on August 23rd cost $94,000, more than most Americans would see in several lifetimes. These 4 months of concentrated splendor would prove to be the mansion's finest hour, though few could have predicted how quickly the glory would fade. The season began with Alva's announcement that she would host a series of political salons for the modern age. Having thrown herself into the suffragette movement following Oliver Belmont's death in 1908, she transformed Beacon Towers into headquarters for New York's radical women. The marble halls that had echoed with waltzes now rang with speeches demanding voting rights. Emmeline Pankhurst herself stayed in the Chinese room for 3 weeks that June, planning American campaigns while surrounded by hand-painted silk depicting subservient concubines. The transformation of the estate for each event required military precision. For the July suffragette rally, head groundskeeper McPherson's team erected 200 white tents across the lawns, installed temporary electric lighting throughout the gardens, and built a speaking platform that could hold 50 people. The kitchen staff, working 18-hour days, prepared food for 3,000 guests, ranging from society matrons to factory workers, a democratic mixing that scandalized Alva's Newport friends. But it was the August Venetian Carnival that truly demonstrated Beacon Towers at its most spectacular. Alva had the estate's private beach transformed into a replica of St. Mark's Square, complete with imported gondolas and Italian gondoliers brought from Venice for the occasion. A temporary canal was dug from the Sound into the estate grounds, allowing guests to arrive by boat directly into the illuminated gardens. The engineering feat required 300 workers laboring for 3 weeks and cost $18,000 alone. The guest list for the carnival read like a merger between the social register and international royalty. The Astors arrived with a retinue of 20, the Vanderbilts, despite the family tension, brought 15, and Prince Alfonso of Spain appeared with his American wife, requiring special security arrangements that included hiring Pinkerton detectives to patrol the grounds. The evening's entertainment featured the entire Metropolitan Opera Ballet, performing on a floating stage anchored in the temporary canal. Chef Moreau outdid himself for the carnival dinner, preparing a 24-course meal for 400 guests. The menu, preserved in the New York Public Library's culinary collection, included pearls of sterlet caviar in swan-shaped ice sculptures, whole roasted peacocks reconstructed with feathers, and Venetian sunset, a dessert requiring 60 dozen eggs and taking 3 days to prepare. The wine selection alone cost $12,000, including cases of 1870 Chateau d'Yquem and magnums of 1892 Krug. Yet beneath the spectacle lay careful choreography of class anxiety. The evening required 150 servants working in precise coordination, their movements planned to the minute. Butler Worthington's schedule, found in his personal effects, shows that footmen were assigned specific routes through the gardens to ensure no guest waited more than 30 seconds for champagne. The document also reveals the darker side of the evening. 2 servants fainted from exhaustion and had to be carried out through the service passages, while a kitchen maid severely burned her arms preparing the flambéed desserts. The carnival's climax came at midnight with a fireworks display that could be seen from Connecticut. Designed by the Unexcelled Fireworks Company, the same firm that handled presidential inaugurations, the display cost $8,000 and required 2 days to set up. The finale spelled out "Votes for Women" in golden fire across the sky. Alva's characteristic mixing of entertainment and politics that infuriated her conservative neighbors. The morning after revealed the event's true cost. The temporary canal had to be filled immediately, as it was already breeding mosquitoes. The imported gondolas were abandoned on the beach, eventually breaking apart in winter storms. The grounds were littered with champagne bottles, torn gowns, and lost jewelry. The head gardener's team found a diamond bracelet worth $10,000 in the rose garden. But most tellingly, 3 of the exhausted servants gave notice that week, and Chef Moreau suffered what his doctor called nervous exhaustion, requiring a month's recovery in a sanitarium. The local economy, however, had boomed. Every hotel within 20 miles was booked. Hack drivers made a month's wages in one night, and local merchants sold out of everything from flowers to fish. The Long Island Railroad ran special trains from Penn Station, charging premium prices that still resulted in overcrowded cars. The Sands Point Pharmacy recorded its highest sales ever, mostly headache powders and stomach remedies for hungover guests. Society columnists declared the carnival the event of the decade. Town Topics devoted 6 pages to describing the costumes and scandals, including the barely veiled affair between a senator's wife and an Italian count. But more prescient observers noted troubling signs. Several prominent families had declined invitations, citing the circus atmosphere of Alva's entertainments. The old guard was beginning to retreat from such public displays of wealth, especially as labor unrest grew in New York's factories. By September 1909, as the estate's army of workers cleared the last debris from the carnival, Beacon Towers stood at a crossroads. It had proven itself capable of spectacles that rivaled European courts, but at a cost, financial, physical, and social, that was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. The mansion had been built for such moments, yet each one seemed to hasten its eventual decline. Chapter 5. The Price of Paradise. On a cold February morning in 1912, Giovanni Benedetto collapsed in the coal furnace room of Beacon Towers, his lungs finally surrendering to 10 years of coal dust and extreme heat. As fellow workers carried his body through the service tunnels, Alva wouldn't allow corpses to pass through the main halls. None could have imagined that within weeks, his death would trigger a labor investigation that would expose the human cost of maintaining America's grandest estates. Dr. Harrison Mills, the Suffolk County coroner, initially ruled the death as natural causes, pulmonary failure due to occupation. But Benedetto's widow, Maria, refused to accept this verdict. With the help of a young lawyer named Samuel Leibowitz, later to become a famous judge, she pushed for an investigation into working conditions at Gold Coast Estates. What emerged was a damning portrait of industrial-scale exploitation, dressed in aristocratic finery. The investigation revealed that Beacon Towers' heating system, which created the comfortable 72-degree environment Alva demanded year-round, required 3 shifts of coal heavers working in conditions that regularly exceeded 110 degrees. These men, mostly Italian immigrants, developed what local doctors had begun calling mansion lung, a form of pneumoconiosis specifically associated with estate work. Of the 47 men who had worked in Beacon Towers' furnace rooms since 1904, records showed that 11 had died of respiratory conditions, and another 15 were unable to work due to illness. The financial disparities uncovered were equally stark. While Alva spent $3,000 on a single dress worn once to the Metropolitan Opera, her laundresses earned $6 weekly, requiring them to work 500 weeks to match the cost of one garment they would spend days cleaning. The estate's annual flower budget of $45,000 exceeded the combined annual wages of all 20 gardeners who grew and arranged them. Most grotesquely, the $8,000 spent on the 1909 Carnival's fireworks could have doubled the annual wages of every servant in the mansion. The investigation also exposed the estate's elaborate system for hiding workplace accidents. When stable hand Patrick Morrison lost his arm in a carriage accident on estate grounds, he was paid $200 to sign a document absolving the estate of responsibility and agreeing never to discuss the incident. When scullery maid Catherine Walsh suffered severe burns from a kitchen explosion, she was dismissed with 2 weeks' pay and a requirement to leave the county immediately. But perhaps most revealing was the testimony of Margaret O'Sullivan, the head housekeeper who had finally agreed to speak after leaving Alva's employment. She described a culture of fear that permeated the servant quarters. Staff were prohibited from discussing wages with each other, forbidden from joining any form of labor organization, and subject to immediate dismissal for disloyalty, which included everything from questioning orders to being seen reading socialist newspapers. O'Sullivan's most damning revelation concerned the children. Many estate workers' families lived in company housing on the property's edge, and their children as young as 8 were expected to perform unpaid labor as training for future service. These children, who should have been in school, instead spent their days polishing silver, pulling weeds, and running errands. The local truant officer, O'Sullivan revealed, had been paid to look the other way. The economic structure of Beacon Towers created ripple effects throughout the community. Local merchants, dependent on the mansion's orders, were forced to accept payment terms that often stretched to 6 months, while being required to provide goods on demand. When fishmonger Thomas Murphy tried to insist on payment for $800 worth of outstanding bills, he found himself blacklisted not just from Beacon Towers, but from every estate on the Gold Coast, forcing him into bankruptcy within months. The investigation revealed that Beacon Towers wasn't unique, but rather representative of a system that treated workers as disposable components in machines for manufacturing prestige. The Gold Coast estates collectively employed over 5,000 workers, making them Long Island's largest industry, yet one completely unregulated and exempt from the labor protections slowly emerging in factories and mines. The mansion's ledgers, subpoenaed during the investigation, revealed the true economics of Gilded Age grandeur. In 1911 alone, Beacon Towers consumed 2,600 tons of coal, $31,000, 14,000 pounds of meat, 31,000 towels, 14,000 pounds of meat, 8,400, 3,000 bottles of wine, $25,000, 50,000 pounds office, 25,000 towels, 50,000 pounds office, 2,500, and required $147,000 in staff wages. The total annual operating cost of $420,000 exceeded the combined annual income of 400 average American families. Yet for all this expense, the human machinery was breaking down. Staff turnover had increased to 60% annually by 1912. The quality of applicants was declining as word spread about conditions. Several key positions, including chef after Moreau's breakdown, remained unfilled for months. The invisible army that had made Beacon Towers' grandeur possible was deserting, driven away by impossible demands and inadequate compensation. The investigation's final report, published in March 1913, called for minimum wage laws for domestic workers, maximum hour regulations, and workplace safety inspections for private estates. The Gold Coast millionaires, including Alva, mobilized their political connections to ensure none of these recommendations became law, but the damage to their reputations was done. The newspapers that had once breathlessly reported their parties now carried exposés about servant exploitation. Alva's response was characteristic. She reduced the indoor staff by half, closed entire wings of the mansion, and began spending more time in France, where, she complained, servants still knew their place. By 1913, Beacon Towers operated with a skeleton crew of 30, down from its peak of 95. The great machine was slowly grinding to a halt, its gears stripped by the very forces that had once driven it. The Benedetto case was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, but Giovanni's death marked a turning point. The age of unlimited servants willing to sacrifice their health for proximity to wealth was ending. The grand estates would continue for another decade, but their foundations, built on the backs of invisible armies, were already crumbling. Chapter 6. The Great Unraveling. The telegram arrived at Beacon Towers on August 4, 1914, as Alva Belmont sat in her morning room overlooking the Sound. European war declared, stop markets in panic, stop advise immediate return, read the message from her financial advisor. Within hours, the world that had created and sustained Beacon Towers began its irreversible collapse. The Great War would not only reshape global politics, but would deliver a fatal blow to the American aristocracy's ability to maintain their domestic empires. The immediate impact was financial. Alva's portfolio, heavily invested in European bonds and international shipping, lost $2 million in value within the first month of war. Her annual income, which had sustained Beacon Towers' enormous appetite, dropped from $400,000 to barely $150,000. For the first time since the mansion's construction, she was forced to confront the mathematics of maintaining a 140-room palace on a merely wealthy, rather than astronomically rich, income. But the war's effects went far beyond finances. By September 1914, 8 of Beacon Towers' male servants had left to return to Europe for military service. The Belgian footman, 2 French sous chefs, and 3 British grooms departed within days of their nation's mobilizations. Most devastatingly, James Worthington, the English butler who had orchestrated the mansion's complex service ballet for a decade, felt duty-bound to return to England, leaving a void that proved impossible to fill. The labor shortage became critical as American entry into the war approached. By 1917, young men who might have entered service were joining the military or taking factory jobs that paid twice what domestic service offered. The Sands Point estate, that had once received hundreds of applications for each position, now struggled to fill any vacancy. Alva was forced to hire untrained workers, including a butler who had previously been a hotel clerk and couldn't distinguish between fish and dessert forks. The war also transformed social expectations. The elaborate entertainments that justified Beacon Towers' existence became not just financially impossible, but socially unacceptable. Conspicuous consumption while Americans died in French trenches was considered treasonous to the war effort. When Alva attempted a modest dinner party in 1917, only 40 guests, 8 courses instead of the usual 20, she was publicly criticized in the New York Tribune for fiddling while democracy burns. The estate's physical maintenance began to visibly deteriorate. The army of gardeners that had maintained 50 acres of formal gardens was reduced to 6 men trying to prevent complete wilderness. The famous rose garden, which had required daily attention from 4 specialists, grew wild and thorny. The greenhouses, which had produced exotic orchids and tropical fruits year-round, were shut down when the coal needed to heat them was redirected to war industries. Inside, entropy accelerated. The silk wallpapers in unused rooms began to peel in the salt air without constant climate control. The golden leaf on the ballroom ceiling, requiring annual touch-ups, began to flake away. The marble stairs, without daily polishing, grew dull and stained. Beacon Towers was aging a decade for every year of war, its beauty dependent on constant human intervention now withheld. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 delivered another blow. The cramped servants' quarters became a viral incubator when the disease reached Long Island in September. Within 2 weeks, 18 of the remaining 30 staff were ill, with 3 deaths. Alva, terrified of infection, fled to her Newport cottage, leaving head housekeeper Ellen Davies, Margaret O'Sullivan's replacement, to manage the crisis with a skeleton crew of survivors. Davies' diary from this period provides a haunting record of the mansion's decline. October 3rd. Only myself and 2 maids capable of work. Have closed all rooms except kitchen and essential passages. Cannot maintain fires in more than 6 rooms. Mice have invaded the Chinese room. October 8th. Found extensive water damage in Blue Gallery. Roof leaking for unknown duration. No workers available for repairs. Have placed buckets but fear for the Gainsborough portraits. The economic transformation accelerated by the war made Beacon Tower's operating model obsolete. Income taxes, introduced to fund the war effort, took an increasing portion of Alva's reduced income. The coal that had cost $12 per ton in 1914 reached $40 by 1918 due to wartime demand. Food prices doubled, then tripled. The mansion that had cost $420,000 annually to operate in 1911 would have required over $800,000 by 1918, money that simply didn't exist. Desperate to reduce expenses, Alva attempted to convert Beacon Towers into a revenue-generating property. She offered it as a convalescent home for wounded officers, but the military deemed it too expensive to retrofit with proper medical facilities. She proposed turning it into a luxury hotel, but investors calculated that the renovation costs would never be recouped. The mansion, built for one woman's specific vision of grandeur, proved impossible to repurpose. By 1919, as the world emerged from war, Beacon Towers stood as a monument to a vanished age. Alva visited only twice that year, each time staying less than a week. She complained that the skeleton staff couldn't maintain proper standards, that the rooms were cold and damp, that the whole place felt haunted by better days. The woman who had built this palace to proclaim her independence now found herself imprisoned by its demands. The final blow came with the post-war labor movement. Domestic workers, empowered by wartime factory experience and union organization, demanded 8-hour days, overtime pay, and days off, concepts antithetical to the total availability service Beacon Towers required. When the remaining staff presented Alva with demands for improved conditions in 1920, she responded by closing the mansion entirely, keeping only a caretaker and 2 groundsmen to prevent complete abandonment. The great unraveling was complete. The forces that had built Beacon Towers, unlimited wealth, unlimited labor, unlimited resources, had been shattered by war, pandemic, and social revolution. The mansion stood empty, but still standing, a hollow crown awaiting its final destruction. Chapter 7. Fitzgerald's Shadow Palace. Scott Fitzgerald first glimpsed Beacon Towers on a humid June evening in 1922, when his friend Herbert Bayard Swope invited him to a party at his nearby estate. Fitzgerald, already gathering material for his 3rd novel, insisted they drive past the abandoned mansion on their way home. What he saw that night, the empty windows reflecting moonlight, the overgrown gardens suggesting lost grandeur, the darkness where light had once blazed, would transform into J. Gatsby's glittering palace, though the real story was far darker than his fiction could capture. Fitzgerald returned alone the next day, bribing the caretaker, old Thomas Murphy, with bootleg gin to let him explore the grounds. Murphy, who had worked at Beacon Towers since its opening, became an unexpected chronicler of its decline. Over several visits that summer, he told Fitzgerald stories that would echo through the Great Gatsby. The parties where guests arrived by yacht, the mysterious passages through which lovers disappeared, the morning after the 1909 carnival when a dead woman was found floating in the temporary canal, her identity never discovered. The writer filled 3 notebooks with observations of Beacon Towers, documents now held at Princeton Library. His notes reveal how directly the mansion influenced his fictional creation. The tower light, visible from East and West Egg, beacon soared beckon to the wandering hearts. Green copper roof oxidizing like money corrupting. Gatsby's reach exceeding grasp, Belmont building beyond even her capacity to inhabit. He was particularly fascinated by the servant passages, writing, "Two worlds in one house, the seen and the unseen, which is more real." But Fitzgerald discovered something at Beacon Towers that he couldn't put in his novel: the estate's connection to Arnold Rothstein, the gambler who fixed the 1919 World Series and served as the model for Meyer Wolfsheim. Murphy revealed that in 1920-21, when the mansion stood empty, Rothstein had used it as a storage depot for bootleg liquor, paying Alva's estate manager $1,000 monthly to look the other way. The Coast Guard had raided the property twice, but found nothing. The liquor was hidden in the coal tunnels that honeycombed beneath the estate. The bootlegging operation explained mysterious activities locals had observed. Boats arriving at the private beach on moonless nights, trucks leaving the service entrance at dawn, men with Tommy guns patrolling the perimeter. Fitzgerald incorporated these elements into Gatsby's criminal connections, but the reality was more sordid. Murphy claimed at least 3 men had been murdered on the grounds during territorial disputes, their bodies dumped in the Sound or buried in the abandoned gardens. Fitzgerald also discovered, through conversations with former servants he tracked down in Sands Point Village, the story of James Worthington's secret. The perfect English butler had been stealing from Alva for years, not money, but something more valuable: information. He had copied guest lists, recorded overheard stock tips, and noted political conversations, selling this intelligence to competing families and business rivals. His sudden return to England in 1914 wasn't patriotic duty, but flight from discovery. Alva had found out, but couldn't prosecute, without revealing the embarrassing secrets he knew. This theme of deception within deception fascinated Fitzgerald. In his notes, he wrote, "The mansion itself is a lie, a Scottish castle on Long Island, Roman marble in America, aristocratic pretensions in a democracy. Every surface conceals another surface. Gatsby's transformation of himself no more false than Belmont's transformation of reality through architecture." The writer was particularly drawn to the abandoned ballroom, where he spent hours on multiple visits. The parquet floors had buckled from water damage, creating a rolling landscape of rotted wood. The mirrors, mottled with oxidation, reflected distorted images. The chandelier, its supporting chain rusted, hung at a dangerous angle. He wrote to his editor Maxwell Perkins, "I found Gatsby's party after everyone has gone home forever." During one visit in August 1922, Fitzgerald encountered another trespasser, a middle-aged woman searching through the overgrown gardens with a small spade. She identified herself as Maria Benedetto, widow of the furnace worker who had died in 1912. She came annually on the anniversary of his death to collect soil from the estate, which she mixed with earth from Italy to place on his grave. "He gave his life to this place," she told Fitzgerald. "Part of him should always be here, part of here should be with him." This encounter profoundly affected Fitzgerald's conception of Gatsby. In his notes that evening, he wrote, "The great houses consume people, digest them into service, and excrete them when used up. Gatsby consumed by his own creation. The dream house devours the dreamer." This darkness pervades the novel's undertone, the sense that Gatsby's mansion is not just a setting, but a carnivorous entity. Fitzgerald made his final visit to Beacon Towers in September 1923, just as he was completing the first draft of Gatsby. He found demolition notices posted and salvage crews already removing valuable fixtures. He convinced a worker to let him take a piece of marble from the grand staircase, the same stairs where Giovanni Benedetto had carried coal, where society women had made grand entrances, where bootleggers had hauled cases of champagne. He kept this piece on his desk while writing, a tangible reminder of American ambition's material weight. The Great Gatsby, published in 1925, transformed beacon towers into an immortal symbol of the American dream's corruption. But Fitzgerald knew he had only told part of the story. In a letter to Ernest Hemingway, he wrote, "I made Gatsby's house too clean, too romantic. The real mansion was built on tuberculosis lungs and broken backs. But who would want to read that truth at their beach house?" Chapter 8. The Anatomy of Demolition. At 7 a.m. on October 15, 1927, Foreman Michael Brennan of the Union Wrecking Company raised his hand, and the first wrecking ball struck Beacon Tower's north wall. The impact sent a shudder through the entire structure, as if the mansion recognized its own death had begun. Over the next 6 weeks, a crew of 60 men would methodically dismantle what 300 men had spent 3 years building, selling the bones of American aristocracy for scrap prices that mocked the original construction cost. The demolition contract, preserved in the Sands Point Historical Society, reveals the cold economics of destruction. Union Wrecking paid Alva Belmont's estate $2,800 for the right to demolish Beacon Towers and keep the salvage. This sum represented less than 1% of the mansion's construction cost, but Alva, now living permanently in France, simply wanted the tax burden removed. She never returned to see her palace destroyed, later writing to a friend, "I prefer to remember it as it was meant to be, not as it became." Brennan, an Irish immigrant who had demolished many of New York's old structures, later recalled that Beacon Towers was the most challenging project of his career. The mansion had been built to last centuries, with walls 3 feet thick and foundations that extended 20 feet into bedrock. Each stone had been precisely placed and mortared with a cement mixture that had grown harder with age. What had taken a day to build now took a day to destroy. The salvage operation began with the valuable fixtures. The Carrara marble staircase, which had cost $50,000 to install, was carefully dismantled over 2 weeks and sold to a movie theater in Albany for $3,000. The gold leaf from the ballroom ceiling was scraped off and melted down, yielding barely $500 worth of gold. The carved wooden panels from the library went to a speakeasy in Manhattan, where they would witness a different kind of revelry than Alva had intended. But the most poignant salvage came from unexpected sources. When workers opened the walls, they found dozens of items hidden by servants over the years: love letters, photographs, small amounts of money, and in one case, a child's diary describing life in the servants' quarters. These artifacts, worthless to the salvage company, were often pocketed by workers or thrown into burn piles. Local historian Catherine Mills managed to rescue several boxes of such materials, which now provide crucial documentation of servant life. The demolition exposed the mansion's hidden infrastructure, like an autopsy revealing organ systems. The 15 miles of iron piping that had carried heat throughout the building was extracted and sold to a shipyard for $8,000. The electrical system, one of the most advanced of its era, yielded 2 tons of copper wire worth $4,000. The 8 coal furnaces, which had consumed Giovanni Benedetto and countless others, were broken apart with sledgehammers, their iron sold for $600, about 2 years of wages for the men who had died feeding them. As walls came down, they revealed the mansion's construction secrets. Workers discovered that many of the supposedly solid marble columns were actually hollow, filled with rubble, and faced with thin marble veneer, a cost-cutting measure that contradicted the image of unlimited expense. The famous pink Tennessee marble bathroom, supposedly carved from a single block, was actually 7 pieces expertly joined and disguised. Even in its grandest gestures, Beacon Towers had contained deceptions. The demolition attracted unexpected visitors. Former servants came to watch their former prison destroyed. Maria Benedetto returned, collecting bricks that her husband might have touched. Margaret O'Sullivan, the former head housekeeper, stood at the gates for the entire first day of demolition, telling reporters, "20 years of my life are in those walls. I'm watching my own past being erased." Local scavengers descended each evening after the crews left, searching for overlooked valuables. Children collected pieces of colored glass from the stained glass windows. Gardeners dug up exotic plants from the grounds before they were bulldozed. One enterprising local, Jimmy Patterson, made a business of selling authentic pieces of the Gatsby mansion to tourists, though Fitzgerald scholars note he was selling rubble from at least 3 different demolished estates. The demolition revealed environmental crimes that had been hidden for decades. The ground beneath the servants' quarters was contaminated with lead from paint and pipes. The coal storage areas had leached toxins into the soil that would require remediation decades later. The private sewer system had been draining untreated waste directly into Long Island Sound. Beacon Towers had been slowly poisoning its environment throughout its existence. As demolition progressed, workers made increasingly grim discoveries. In the wine cellar, they found the skeleton of a man in servant's livery, apparently trapped when a wall collapsed during construction and never missed or searched for. In the abandoned gardens, police were called when workers uncovered 3 bodies in shallow graves, likely victims of the bootlegging wars, their identities never determined. The mansion was literally built on and around death. The final phase involved dynamiting the foundations. On November 28, 1927, crowds gathered to watch the last tower fall. The explosion, meant to drop the structure straight down, instead sent it toppling toward the Sound, crushing the abandoned greenhouse complex and sending debris across the former gardens. The dust cloud was visible from Connecticut, a gray shroud marking the end of an era. Within 6 months, nature began reclaiming the site. Vines covered the remaining foundation stones. Trees sprouted in the formal gardens. The private beach, no longer maintained, eroded back into wild shoreline. By 1930, visitors reported that it was difficult to tell exactly where the great mansion had stood. The erasure was nearly complete, except for the stone gateposts that still stand today, markers of an entrance to nowhere. Chapter 9. Ghosts in the Rubble. In the spring of 1973, archaeologist Dr. Patricia Worthington, ironically the grandniece of Beacon Tower's butler, led the first systematic excavation of the mansion's ruins. Armed with ground-penetrating radar and a team of graduate students from Columbia, she came seeking artifacts, but discovered something far more complex. An entire hidden history written in buried objects, construction debris, and human remains that had been invisible to the estate's original inhabitants. The excavation began at the former servants' quarters, where Worthington's team uncovered a cache of objects deliberately hidden beneath floorboards, union organizing pamphlets from 1908, a handmade knife, photographs of families back in Europe, and significantly, a detailed floor plan of the mansion marked with escape routes. These items suggested that servants had been planning either organized resistance or mass departure years before the estate's decline. In what had been the mansion's coal storage area, the team made a gruesome discovery. Bone fragments mixed with coal ash, later identified as belonging to at least 4 individuals. Forensic analysis suggested these were workers who had died in furnace accidents and been illegally cremated to avoid investigations. The bones showed evidence of chronic malnutrition and stress fractures consistent with excessive physical labor. These men had literally been burned as fuel for the mansion's comfort. The archaeological evidence contradicted many official records. While estate documents claimed only 2 construction deaths, the team found personal effects: work badges, tools marked with initials, a crushed pocket watch stopped at 2:47, suggesting at least 7 additional casualties. These items were found in foundation concrete, indicating workers who had fallen or been buried in quick-setting cement, their disappearances never reported. Dr. Worthington's most significant discovery came from the mansion's garbage middens. These archaeological gold mines revealed the true consumption patterns of the estate. While Alva's menus showed elaborate French cuisine, the garbage revealed vast quantities of cheap cuts of meat, basic vegetables, and stale bread, the real diet of the servant class. Medicine bottles showed epidemic use of laudanum and alcohol among staff, self-medication for the pain and exhaustion of their labor. The excavation attracted former servants and their descendants who provided oral histories that contextualized the findings. Anna Kowalski, daughter of a Polish chambermaid, revealed that her mother had sewn jewelry taken from guest rooms into her corset, planning to sell it for passage back to Europe. She never did, but passed the stolen diamonds to her daughter as a dowry. "Every servant stole something," Anna said. "It was the only way to get what we were owed." The team discovered an extensive network of unauthorized tunnels beneath the official service passages. These crude excavations, some barely 3 feet high, had been dug by workers to create private spaces away from supervision. In these tunnels, they found evidence of gambling, moonshine production, and most surprisingly, what appeared to be a shrine with offerings to Saint Barbara, patron saint of miners and anyone who worked with explosives, a sacred space in the bowels of Alva's secular palace. Environmental testing revealed the extent of contamination. Lead levels in the soil exceeded safe limits by 400%. Mercury from broken thermometers and mirrors had leached into groundwater. Asbestos from pipe insulation had spread throughout the grounds. The very earth was toxic, poisoned by the materials of luxury. Local health records from the 1920s-1940s showed elevated cancer rates in Sands Point, possibly linked to estate contamination. The archaeology also revealed instances of resistance and sabotage. Cut marks on wooden beams showed deliberate weakening. Expensive marble tiles had been intentionally cracked during installation. Chinese wallpaper had obscene words written in Italian beneath the top layer. Workers had been conducting a silent war against the mansion throughout its construction and operation, leaving their protests embedded in its structure. In 2018, advances in DNA technology allowed researchers to identify some of the remains found during the 1973 excavation. One skeleton was matched to Giuseppe Torelli, a stoneworker who had supposedly returned to Italy in 1903. His family had been told he had abandoned them, but he had actually died in a construction accident, his body hidden to avoid compensation claims. His great-granddaughter, learning the truth 115 years later, successfully sued the current landowners for a symbolic $1 and a memorial plaque. Modern ground-penetrating radar has revealed more anomalies suggesting additional remains and artifacts still buried. However, the current owners, the site is now divided among 7 luxury homes, have resisted further excavation. They fear both the financial implications of finding more bodies and the symbolic weight of building their own dreams on such thoroughly haunted ground. The archaeological record of Beacon Towers tells a different story than the Society pages or even Fitzgerald's fiction. It reveals an institution built on hidden violence, sustained by systematic exploitation, and literally constructed over the bodies of its builders. Every luxury contained its opposite. Beneath the ballroom, tunnels of desperation. Within the walls, evidence of resistance. In the ground itself, the bones of the erased. Dr. Worthington's final report concluded, Beacon Towers was not one building, but 2, the visible palace and the invisible prison. Archaeology reveals that the mansion's true foundation was not stone, but human suffering, its mortar mixed with blood, its gilding covering a fundamental rot. The estate consumed human beings as surely as it consumed coal, and with as little regard for the ash left behind. Chapter 10. The Gatsby Complex. Today, 7 McMansions occupy the land where Beacon Towers once stood, their identical facades and 2-car garages a different kind of American dream than Alva Belmont imagined. Each sells for around $3 million. Coincidentally, exactly what Alva spent building her 140-room palace, though these buyers get only 5,000 square feet instead of 130,000. The new owners know nothing of Giovanni Benedetto's collapsed lungs, of Maria searching for soil to mix with her husband's grave earth, of the bootleggers' bullets still buried in their landscaped yards. But Beacon Towers refuses to remain buried. Every summer, tourists arrive clutching copies of Gatsby, searching for the green light that never existed here. They take selfies at the original gateposts, the only remaining structures, not knowing they're photographing monuments to exploitation as much as excess. The local historical society has proposed memorial plaques for the workers who died, but the Homeowners Association voted it down, fearing impact on property values. The dead remain unnamed, their only monument the toxins still leaching through the soil. What Beacon Towers represents has never been more relevant. In an age of new Gilded Age inequality, when billionaires build bunkers in New Zealand and spaceships to escape Earth entirely, the mansion's story reminds us that extreme wealth has always required extreme suffering. The invisible armies haven't disappeared. They've merely been relocated to Amazon warehouses, gig economy apps, and factories conveniently located in other countries. We've simply gotten better at hiding the bodies. The mansion's true tragedy isn't that it was demolished, but that we've learned nothing from its ruins. We still build our comfort on others' pain, still refuse to see the servants' passages that run parallel to our lives, still prefer Fitzgerald's romantic lies to Benedetto's documented death. We've preserved the gateposts, but not the names of those who built them. We've turned Gatsby's fictional mansion into a tourist attraction while erasing the real mansion's roll call of the dead. This documentary began with a question. How did a palace built to last centuries survive barely a quarter of one? The answer is simple. Beacon Towers was built on a foundation of human bones, and bones, unlike stone, crumble under weight. Every mansion, every monument, to wealth, eventually faces the same reckoning. The only question is whether we'll remember the names of those crushed beneath the rubble, or whether they'll remain, like most of Beacon Towers' builders and servants, anonymous casualties of someone else's dream.